Dobrý deň, vítajte. Dnešným hosťom v relácii Portrét je muž, ktorý je biznis coach a autor kníh, vďaka ktorým tisícky firiem a milióny podnikateľov posilnili svoj biznis. Okrem toho, že sám úspešne podniká a v amerických televíziách často vystupuje ako komentátor, prednáša aj dokonca americkým prezidentom. Svoj pohľad na biznis prezentoval na fórach vo všetkých 50 štátoch Spojených štátov amerických a v 14 krajinách sveta. Za svoj prínos v biznise a vo filantropii získal ocenenie Who's a Hero. Je dokonca členom prestížnej siene slávy speakerov. Dnes je mojím hosťom Scott McKain. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
I would like to start with a very simple question.
Sure.
What is your personal definition of a business?
I think the purpose of any business is to profitably create experiences that are so compelling to their customers that the customer's loyalty becomes assured. In other words, it is the job of any business to serve its customers in such an exciting and dramatic and compelling manner that customers just have to go back. They can't think of any place else they would rather go and do business.
If you talk this way to business people, they are also concentrated on numbers and on profits. It has to be then for something very strange to listen to this kind of speech about the business definition, isn't it?
You're exactly right. I hear that quite often, but I often tell them that the numbers don't work unless the people do. One of the big discussions we're having in the United States is the jobs problem, that the unemployment rate is much too high. And I recently wrote that we do not have a jobs problem, we have a customer problem. If businesses had more customers, they need to hire more people to serve those customers. And as long as businesses are focusing on the numbers and not on the people, then the numbers are never going to work.
At the beginning, you've been complaining about your accent, and I should tell that you are still a boy from Indiana,
Yes,
and you
I
still
am.
live there. And your parents, they had a small grocery store over there.
You've done your homework. I appreciate that.
I would like to know what is still in this Scott McKain, deep in his heart. What did he learn about the customer relationship? What did he learn about the behavior of the customer from that time?
When we were faced with a challenge in my little grocery store, my mom and dad owned the small town, we call them a mom and pop grocery store. It's a tiny little store in the tiny little town where I grew up. And we were told that a supermarket was going to be built in our hometown. Well, this was our first time to have competition. It was a very, very difficult time for us. And I remember my dad saying, Scott, our lives will never be the same. And he was right. But what happened was we had a customer come in at, I'll never forget it, 10 o'clock in the morning. He was our first customer of the day because everyone else is at the supermarket,
Yeah.
right? And I had to ask him the question, why did you shop here? And with a big smile on his face, he said, you like me.
Oh,
And I thought, no, I don't.
That's an
We do
experience,
now. It was
yeah.
an experience, right? And so from that young age, I realized that what kept him coming back was not the price of the laundry detergent or not the price of the, of the hamburger. What kept him coming back was the experience that he received doing business with us. And it was just a great lesson at that young age for me, that one of the things that my dad realized, and my dad, he also was a truck driver and he didn't have a university education, but he had this way of dealing with people that was just so inspiring to me. And it taught me that if you can make it right with people, and if you can create that experience, then people are going to keep coming back. And because of that, even though at the beginning it was very tough, over the long term, the supermarket didn't make it because people wanted to do business with us. And it was just a great learning experience at a young age for me.
do you love those places where you're going to shop or to buy coffee, where they know your name?
Oh, absolutely. A buddy of mine back in the States, I asked him what was his favorite restaurant. And he said, well, it's the one where they call me by name. I think that's true. If you walk in and they know your name, they can't wait to have you seated. Even the server that isn't waiting on you comes by to say hello. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of things just create these experiences that keep us coming back. But the amazing thing is how few businesses realize it. It doesn't cost them any extra money to do that. For another example, there's a tire company in the United States. It sells the same tires as every other retailer in your country and in mine. I mean, there's no difference in the tires, but yet when you pull in, they sprint out of the door to run up to serve you. Well, you've got to go there just to see these people running, you know. So creating that incredible experience can make such a compelling difference. And I learned it at the little Indiana grocery store that I grew up in, but I see it all over the world.
You developed very sophisticated models on business, on this kind of basic stuff, which we listen to. It sounds like, well, it's natural. That's human behavior. Mm-hmm. That's how people should treat people, know their name and just respect their customers. It's hard to believe that there are businesses who would pay you for advising them this. Yeah. Isn't it strange?
Oh, it is strange. I wonder that all the time.
Sounds so simple.
But the only thing stranger than that I've been able to realize is that businesses aren't doing this. You know, yeah, I agree. It sounds so normal. It sounds so simple. But yet they aren't doing it. And it seems like for some reason that once we get to work, there's a switch that flips in our brain and we start acting like an employee rather than a customer. Mm-hmm. I know that there are people who mistreat customers, yet when they are the customer, would never stand for that kind of treatment. You know what I mean? In other words, if they were treating customers, if they were treated as a customer, the way that they are treating customers, they'd walk out. But yet they can't, for some reason, get it through their heads. They can't realize that they're people that they're talking to. It isn't a number. It isn't an inanimate object. It's a person. And so that's where we have to get to in business. That's what we realize.
You're living in a state, so I suppose there are not so many reasons to complain about service, because people know that service is not that bad. In Europe, it gets worse.
It's
in
bad
a way.
in the States,
but as a
too.
customer, you personally, do you complain?
Yes, I think it's my obligation.
Yeah?
I really do. I think it's my obligation that if I'm going to be out suggesting this on the stage, I have to live it too. And therefore, if I get bad service, I think it's my obligation to at least mention it. And it's very interesting, the response too, because I've mentioned inferior service to managers who really don't care. They really don't care. And so then you begin to understand how come the employee provides such bad service if the manager doesn't care. And therefore, if I encourage organizations to make a promise to their customers, I feel like it's my responsibility. But on the other hand, if I get great service, I also speak up about that too. Because managers need to know and leaders need to know when their people are providing phenomenal service as well.
There is a very funny story in your book, Collapse of Distinction. And that's a story when you've been in the Soviet Union and you've been there and you've suddenly realized that you look very different compared to the people around you. And you're writing about your feelings, how everybody was like being in a uniform. I must tell you, for 40 years, we had this kind of living over here. It was similarity, uniformity. And we have a saying that there has to be a head chopped off when somebody stands out from the average. Mm-hmm. And many people still think this way. So what do you think, what do we lose if we behave like that? What are we losing?
That's a great question. And I understand that there are cultural aspects to this of which I'm very respectful. It's not my job, or is it anyone's job, to come in from the outside and to say something that would influence from a cultural perspective. But one of the things that we find all over the world in every culture is that people are attracted to what is distinctive. If there is a reason that Apple has become such a global phenomenon, it is because it's not only the products, it's the service, it's the experience is distinctive. And so that experience has to be different for every organization in every particular culture. But if you truly want to attract customers, if you want to succeed over the long term, there's got to be something about you that's different, that's distinctive. And you might find that in being a little more flamboyant. You might find it in being different in your packaging. You might find it in the superiority of your service. But if you're not different, you're going to die in the business world today. Because the only way, at the end of the day, a customer has to find something that makes you different, right? I mean, if they don't find something that makes you different, then they don't purchase at all. If there's nothing else that makes you different other than having a cheaper price, that's a formula for long-term failure. You might get a couple of purchases, but over the long term, your business isn't going to survive because your ability to pay good employees, your ability to grow for the future and to invest, you're not going to have the ability or the finances to do that. And so we talk in the book about how you get to distinction. And it seems to me that the first step to that is, as we were talking previously, is the clarity of knowing who and what you are and deciding that, yes, I am going to be distinctive. I am going to find a way to be different in the marketplace and then pursuing that.
But many people don't even realize that there is a difference between distinction and differentiation.
Yes.
So how would you define the difference, basically?
Well, as you've read in the book, if I slapped every customer in the face, I'd be different. Now, it doesn't mean they'd come back, right? I'll never go there again. So different means that you find, differentiation is you find a way to have some kind of advantage over the competition. But distinction, a friend of mine, Joe Calloway, has a great term. He calls it a category of one.
One.
Of one, right? You're a category of one. You are singular in who and what you are. And when that happens, you get to the point where you know the competition, you're aware of them, but they aren't keeping you awake at night. You know what I mean? I mean, when before he passed, I'll bet Steve Jobs did not lay awake at night and worry about what Sony was going to do tomorrow, because Apple was distinctive. They were going to do and follow their own path. But I'll guarantee the CEO of Sony, Howard Stringer, tossed and turned in bed every night worrying about what Apple was going to do next. Part of the challenge with clarity is it means we define what we are, but it also means we define what we are not. And in business,
that might hurt.
That hurts, right? Because that means sometimes we have to say no. And few of us like to say no in
it's
business.
Like I've been a triangle for 15 years. Now you're telling me I'm a circle?
Yeah, exactly. Well, how can I do that? You're exactly right. And one of the things that happens, though, is if we look historically at the companies that have been successful, they have always planted a flag in the ground and said, this is who we are and what we stand for. And this is also what we won't stand for, right? The ones that are trying to be all things to all people are the ones that seem to pass by the wayside because they can't find a way to separate themselves from their competition.
If you talk to business owners or stakeholders, they know that they have the authority to change things or transform things. But as an employee, if I see the way how to differentiate the service or product I'm providing on behalf of the company, I know that I lack authority to do it. So how should I behave? What can I do?
There are three things. Number one is we decide that we're not going to be distinctive and we're satisfied living that kind of life. To me, that's not a good alternative, right? But that is a choice that you could make, right? I mean, it is a choice. It's not the choice that I would make. Having met you here, I'm assuming that's not a choice that's acceptable for you, but that is a choice. Second choice is I can do all I can to be distinctive in what I do. I am responsible to my superiors in the organization, but I am not responsible for decisions that they make. By that I mean, I'm responsible to them. I'm responsible to show up to work on time, to do what the duties that I'm assigned, and I'm also going to choose to follow a path of distinction. I'm responsible to them. I'm not responsible for them. If they make a bad decision about my choices, I'm not responsible for that, because that leads to the third choice, and that is there will be places in today's world that will appreciate what I've done. It might not be where I am now, but by doing this here, I create a track record of distinction. And again, remember we're saying, well, with distinction, it's something that people are attracted to, and therefore what I will do will attract someone else to engage me with their organization, if not this one. If we pursue a path of distinction, we either become more valuable to our current organization.
Visible.
And visible, exactly. Or that effort makes us more attractive and visible to another organization that does appreciate what we're trying to do. It's not an easy answer. but it is the reality of the world in which we live.
And there is a risk involved. People
Absolutely.
have to take risk.
But no risk, no reward.
What is your biggest risk that you ever done?
Well, I'm continuing to take them, so it's, I hope it's not over. So that's a great question. You know, so far I think the biggest risk has been getting into this profession. For so long, you know, to be in a profession where if no one books me for a speech next month, I don't get paid. You know, I make zero.
Did you give many free speeches before you started?
I gave 1,000 free speeches before I started.
What did you believe when you've done it?
Yeah.
What will happen that someday somebody will pay me for this?
That was the belief, and also the realization, and I think this is important. Looking back, I realized it was more important than I even realized at the time I was doing it. But looking back, you have to be bad before you can be good.
So you've been bad.
I've been really bad, right? I mean, when the Beatles went to Hamburg, Germany, they were a bad band, right? I mean, they weren't that good. But you play hours and hours and hours in a bad seedy club in Hamburg, and all of a, you know, it's not all of a sudden it's over 1,000 performances. It takes 1,000 speeches. It takes, and I think in this instant gratification world, and it's true in every culture, it's true in every country, it's true, we want it now.
Yeah.
And if it's built to last, it cannot be accomplished overnight.
You had many interesting businesses. First of all, we must tell that you've been a movie, and you say not a movie critic, but a movie who?
Reviewer.
Reviewer.
Yes.
What is the difference?
A critic enters to criticize. That's where critic comes from, is to critique, to criticize.
Most of them do.
And most of them do. And so when they walk in the movie, they walk in looking for things that are wrong. And that's just not my point of view in life. I want to walk in thinking it's going to be wonderful. And so someone once said that I was a reverse neurotic. I'm out there thinking everybody's trying to help me. You know? But I would go into a movie and I would look at it and want it to be wonderful. And so my review was just how I felt, hoping it was great. Another thing is, I guess I was the first reviewer to say, don't spend the money to go to the theater, wait until it comes out on DVD, you know, save your money. Or I was always really sensitive about should parents take their children to a particular movie. The other thing I always worried about is if parents were going to a movie and had to pay to get a babysitter, and with money so tight, is this the one that's really worth them going to that effort to go see? So my reviews were always based upon the audience as well, rather than trying to critique.
What do you need to have to feel that my work is not only pure pleasure, I'm on my mission, but it's worth it to travel, to drive those miles and not to sleep in your own bed for those long, long weeks?
Well,
what am I getting?
I got a message right before I came here, and it was from a business in Virginia in the States. And I've never met the person, but he wrote a very lengthy letter, and he said, your book saved my business. And I can't describe what that feels like. That's as good as it gets.
So you've been in your flow.
Yeah, I am so grateful, and I think that's. I often tie it back to what we were talking about earlier. I often think that's where sometimes business people, leaders, individuals get off track, is they forget to be grateful. They forget to be appreciative of where they are. And not a day goes by that I don't appreciate life a little bit more, or that I don't appreciate, you know, what the great things that have happened to me. And I think that's really the only reason that great things might continue to happen, right? Because if you don't appreciate the things that you have been blessed with to this point, why would the universe or why would life bless you with any more in the future? And so I think that appreciation, I think humility is critical. People are less afraid of change if they know what the outcome is going to be. And so one of the real keys is to get the leaders of the organization to be very clear about, we're going to do this, but this is where we're going to end up, right? The reason that the sailors in Columbus's time worried is because they didn't know where the end of the voyage is going to be. That's what often happens in transformation. We're going to change the organization. We're going to change the company. I need to change. I need to change relationships. And we get worried about that because sometimes what we have we think is better than what we could be. And unless, I use the example of the trapeze artist at the circus, right? If I don't let go of this trapeze, I can never get to the next one. And what often happens is we want to hang on to this one as we're reaching for the next one, and that's not going to happen. And that's part of the challenge of transformation is we got to let go to get to the next point. And that's what makes it so incredibly difficult. But I think it's also what makes it so incredibly wonderful when organizations go through this process and see where they can be on the other side. And it's true with individuals as well.
Do you see ego on the way that's stopping it? Yeah?
Of course, of course. Ego is both good and bad, right? Ego is in part what drives us to be better, to improve ourselves, to make a greater contribution. But ego out of balance is also incredibly destructive. We've seen it, leaders with their egos out of place that have destroyed not only their own careers, but the companies that they were leading. We've seen ego of companies get to the point that the company implodes because the company just can't imagine that their customers wouldn't do business with them in the future, right? And so it's a great point you make, because ego can be that thing that can drive change, but ego out of balance can also be the most destructive element that you can find individually and organizationally.
I did my research and I realized that I do remember that you've been talking to the American president as well in the White House. That's why I mentioned ego.
Oh, I
because
appreciate that.
The president has to have an ego.
Of
if you don't
course.
have an ego, you cannot be a president.
So
how is that, advising to a president with a huge ego?
Well, I've joked that anyone who says that they want to be should immediately be disqualified, because if you want it, then you shouldn't have it. It's been very interesting. I've met 7 presidents now, and the variation between them is remarkable. And the difference sometimes between the public persona and what you see in one-to-one conversation is very, very interesting. I have not met President Obama. In private conversation, George Bush is the most engaging, charismatic person you can imagine, and put him in front of a camera and it completely changes, doesn't it? One-on-one. Bill Clinton, when you're speaking with him for those moments, makes you feel like you are the center of the universe. Mm-hmm. It's an unbelievable talent that he has. Ronald Reagan was incredibly charismatic in front of a crowd, but kind of distant when you would speak with him one-on-one, which was a big surprise to me. So, I mean, what you find with those people is that you have to have ego to get there, but some of them surrounded themselves with people who would not bring them the bad news. You know? If, as a leader, I need to hear the bad news. I need to hear what we're not doing right, because if I don't know what we're doing wrong, I can't correct it, right? And some of these people, it's not just ego, it's a fragile ego. It's almost like you have ego without self-confidence. If I have self-confidence, you can bring me bad news, and I have the confidence that we can work together and solve the problem. If I have a lack of personal confidence and a strong ego, then you bring me bad news, and that hurts my feelings, or I didn't make that mistake, that's not my responsibility. And so the ego can be a very, very damaging thing.
I believe, just by listening to you, that talking to presidents is not the biggest accomplishment you've made in your career. So what it is?
Oh, gosh. I like to think I was a great husband for 25 years. I was married to an extraordinary woman, and unfortunately she passed from ovarian cancer. And for 25 years we had a phenomenal relationship. And being with her and starting as we started in a one-bedroom apartment into where she had a very successful career on her own. She was managing the Norman Rockwell art collection. He was a very famous American artist and illustrator. For her to rise to that point in her career, and for me to be fortunate to have best-selling books and speak, and to have a great relationship on top of that was very, very exciting. So that's been my best accomplishment, best thing.
What do you miss the most?
Being with my best friend, you know, that's, I miss the conversations, the communication. And that's, at the end of the speech I'll give here, that's one of the reminders that I'll make to the business people, is that the most important thing in life is making each day count. You know, Steve Jobs said he looks in the mirror every day and would say to himself, is this really what I want to be doing today? And he said, you're going to have some days where the answer is no, but you do it anyway because sometimes you have to do things that you don't want to do. But he said, if you string too many of those days together, then maybe you're doing the wrong thing.
People tend to pretend that it's fine to have a good life. They even say, I have a good life, reasonably good life. But they don't say, I have a great life.
Right.
And there is a big difference between good and great.
Huge, huge. And I think for many of us, that difference between good and great is, do we feel like we are with who we want to be with? Are we doing what we want to do? Are we making a contribution to others? If it's all about you, then pretty soon you're going to realize life isn't that good, right? You can be in a situation where you can have all the things in the world you want, all the material things, but be empty on the inside. And I've found those people who are living a great life to be those people who, it's not that every day is perfect, but they believe that every day they've made some kind of contribution to a person they care about, to something that they care about that's more than themselves individually. People say business can be that way as well, though. If I own a business and there are people working for my business that are improving their lives and feeding and clothing and nourishing their families, what a great contribution that is. And those are also the businesses that appeal to customers, right? Because that caring is sincere. It's not just for the quick transaction.
And it's not only giving, it's getting as well.
Yeah.
People tend to forget it.
You can't outgive the universe. The more you give, and isn't that the strangest thing? The more wonderful things you receive in return.
Thank you very much. Thank you for an interview.
An honor. Thank you.
Naším dnešným hosťom v relácii Portrét bol Scott McKain.
Wow.